name is Tylluan. I'm a solitary pagan witch. I'm an author and the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. And today's little chat, yet another one, in response to a question I received. Could I explain the difference between witchcraft and Wicca? Well, I can do my best. People often muddle the two up. Some people will tell you that they're all the same. They're not. They're not exactly the same. In fact, if we start off with Wicca, that was Noah. If we start off with Wicca, we will get, that was Daisy. Wicca has several different strands, if you like, of belief and practice, according to who really started that particular strain. So you have things like Gardnerian Wicca, which is named after Gerald Gardner, and you have Alexandrian Wicca, which was named after Alexander's, and there are others. The thing about Wicca is that basically it is an initiated system, which means that you have to find a coven to join, and then you have to work through your initiations, which can take quite a long time, and gradually you rise up in knowledge. That's the idea. Wicca was first brought to public attention. I'm choosing my words carefully here, and I'll explain why. Wicca was first brought to public attention by Gerald Gardner in the early 1950s. He said that he had been initiated into a much older coven in the New Forest by somebody called Old Dorothy. There's been a lot of controversy about who Old Dorothy might have been and if she even existed. You will find those who say yes she did and those who say no she didn't. I don't know. But he brought it to public attention, and he wrote a number of books about it. And of course he chose his time quite carefully, because the Witchcraft Act had been repealed in the early 1950s. So he just caught that period when it was all right to talk about it and nobody was going to get into trouble for being a witch. And you might say, oh, well, we were all long past that anyway. No, actually there were prosecutions under that act, usually involving mediums. But one of the last ones, Helen Duncan, was in the 1940s during World War II, and she was actually found guilty and sent to prison. So, you know, it was a very tangled thing. It was a bad piece of legislation, and it took a long time for it to be repealed. I think it was originally set up in the 18th century, something like that. Anyway, Gerald Gardner, if you like, he kicked off the whole thing about Wicca, although there are those who say that it was a very much older faith. But really the only way we can reliably trace it back is as far as him. That's really where we begin to stall a little bit. Witchcraft, on the other hand, has been around a very, very long time. You know, there were witches in ancient Greece. In fact, most areas have their witches, their wise women, cunning men, people who were keepers of an ancient store of knowledge, people who did healing, they did cursing, they did, what else could we say they did? Well, they did all sorts of things, divination. Not all diviners were witches, but witches, most of them could do divination. So it's quite a complex thing. And of course it was witches who were persecuted, not necessarily Wiccans. So it becomes... The thing to remember is that beliefs are always changing, and that what we think about something in one decade, 1/4 century, is quite different from the next. So you can say from about the 1920 up until about 1970, it was thought that Wicca in particular was an old religion, and you could trace it all back and you could make lots of connections. And nowadays the given view is that no, you can't really make these connections. Something might be old, something might be 150 years old, but that doesn't mean you can trace it back to 1500. And it certainly doesn't mean you can trace it back to 200 BC or something like that. You just can't do it. You've got to be a little bit careful, a little bit canny. Having said that, I think some people are absolute killjoys who really want to step on everything. And I'm not quite sure why. I think you have to read, you have to study and find out what's what for yourself. Another thing is that Wicca has certain things which have become set down as absolute imperatives for us to believe in it. So you have things like the Wiccan Rede or the threefold law. And of course one of the problems with that is that there are those who say, well, if you're a witch you mustn't do so and so because of the Wiccan Rede. And you're like, yes, but it doesn't apply to me. I mean, one reason I am a witch, not a Wiccan, is because I don't believe the an it harm none, do as thou wilt, because it's undoable for me. You know, there are times when I will hex. If I really, really have to, I will. And I have. And I have cleaned up the mess when I've got things wrong as well. And I am not having somebody telling me that things come back to me so many fold. Sometimes things come back to us tenfold. Sometimes they come back only once. So it doesn't work for me. Doesn't mean it's wrong for other people. I've got no beef with it at all. It just means we have to be sensible and we have to pick whatever it is that appeals to us that we think we can live with. So I think that's how I would do it. I mean, there are problems with things like finding a coven to take you on, and I have dealt with those in earlier talks. But for this one, what is the main difference? Well, Wicca is a later, I think, a later addition to the pagan path. And I think witchcraft, I think, is older. But having said that, I think a lot has been reconstructed in the past 40 years or so. So again, if it doesn't sit easily with you, well, go and discover why it doesn't sit easily with you. Make your own decisions, but make them, sorry about this, all this snoring, make them informed decisions. That's what really matters. You wouldn't think he could be out there, would you, snoring, and we can still hear it. Never mind. So that's basically my take on it. I hope it's been helpful, and thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.